I won't hold you up too long, John. I'm just so happy to get together and speak to you. Get the chance to speak to you, John. Speaking about the situation, obviously, in Gaza. Catching up to date with things as I do every day, as I'm sure you do. Where to start off? I mean, maybe start off exactly where we are. I mean, we are now with Israel that has started the invasion of Rafah. It's not full on yet, but I mean, they have started, haven't they? And what have we got with the American situation? We've got Biden withholding £2,000 bonds, but we know this is just political theatre. This is just for ones that, they say, oh, you can't use them against Israel, but they're getting them for everywhere else. So they're still getting these munitions. And if America was serious about doing something, Biden would give a phone call, have a no-fly zone or something. So this invasion of Rafah, and if listening to what Netanyahu says and on all his aides in the government, they're going ahead with this assault, and nothing seems to be halting it. What's your take on where we are right now, John?
Well, it's deeply depressing, and like you, I check. I'm trying to measure how often, trying to control how often a day I do allow myself to get depressed, because it's thoroughly depressing. And my understanding is that the US has agreed a £1 billion package. Whether that was late last night or this morning, when I checked this morning, that was on Al Jazeera anyway. And you're right to say it is entirely political theatre. Whether this is a full-scale proxy war, Iran, US, I don't know. But Biden, and when you're my age, you shouldn't be critical of people of age. But Biden, the other day, may have let it slip when he said we've entered Rafah. It is very clear that whatever's taking place, and it is a complicated situation domestically in Israel, but whatever's taking place in this genocide, and that's what it is, and anyone's reasonable interpretation of what's going on in this genocide is being done with the acceptance, maybe not the full blessing, but the acceptance of the US government, and who clearly want to maintain a significant military presence, either directly or indirectly through the fascist so-called Israeli Defense Force. But we forget at our peril, of course, there's the high-level politics, but there's also the poor wee kids that are starving. A wee boy dying of dehydration yesterday, one of many. And the big fun that this is for the Zionists, for the settlers, destroying aid going in from Jordan in recent days, and filming themselves.
You're in for 5 days now. This is the 5th day where no one managed to get it.
And in any case, what was going in was inadequate. So you're right, it's depressing that the US wants to throw things into the mix, this building piers and taking stuff in by boat. All that we need to do is say, open that border, let these lorries through.
Yeah, exactly.
Much of the produce, in any case, I don't know if you saw a video from an Egyptian lorry driver the other day. They're scanning around the hundreds of vehicles, explaining that some of them contain frozen goods. These goods were already perishing. Yeah. So if there were a will to stop this, and I mean a will not simply from the US, but also the UK, from France, from Germany, from Canada, the main players, then this would stop. It's difficult for Netanyahu. Netanyahu's a criminal. He was on trial. He's a fraudster. He's relying on a convicted terrorist with Ben-Gvir, the security minister, and others to maintain his position there. There is no, and it's a great frustration. There's no very vocal opposition to the way that they're conducting themselves, and quite simply, it's out of control. I genuinely think it's out of control. This is the 76th anniversary of the Nakba, and what's happening just now, the demolitions, the eradication of any trace of a Palestinian presence, what's happening now was happening 76 years ago, and the world's largely watching on.
Yeah.
Largely watching on. But then, of course, you did have Eurovision, and you've got whatever happened, Love Island or whatever nonsense is on, which are, of course, distractions for the masses, who've been told it doesn't matter to bandy about words like terrorists and goodies and baddies, and
it's a shocking situation, and I'm probably mentioned this to you before once or twice, John. Certainly the whole Gaza thing. There's never nothing on the mainstream press. If ever I go down to the co-op and the newsstand and stuff, I mean, sometimes I forget, but sometimes I look. I don't know why. But there's absolutely nothing, as you say. There's just a load of gubbins. I mean, it's interesting what you say. Of course, like you say, Israel there is. We'll assume that most of our listeners will have some of the kind of history of understanding. Can't go into all details. But like you said, God, I've lost. Can't remember what I was going to say now.
Well, if it was about the Nakba, of course, UK has a particular responsibility. It's a very complicated world we live in. At the end of the First World War, there was where the spoils were divvied up against the winners. The Ottoman Empire collapses. The UK had the mandate for Palestine, and what's happened since then, the UK must accept responsibility for. With what our unelected Foreign Secretary saying, it doesn't really matter. The munitions going out from the UK. We had Rishi Sunak proudly telling people that the RAF were providing aerial support to the Israeli Defence Forces. Now, I see these poor wee kids. I see the grieving mothers, the grieving fathers, the destroyed hospitals from aerial assault, and just wonder what role the RAF has played in that. Because, of course, this has never been debated in Parliament. They want to talk about poor souls on inflatable dinghies in the English channels, what they want to do, So
yeah, sorry, John. Yes, I was sorry, John. I was just going to say because I was just referring back to what you said earlier about Israel is Israel even say they're like the 51st state. Kind we do get that in the Jewish state and stuff, but it's like you said, they're America's proxy, in that region and the power base, so America can project there through Israel and stuff. But of course, keeping it up to date stuff with what's going on, say as an example, say with like Saudi Arabia and stuff, and and these accords that are meant to be going on with Israel and stuff. So America is not such an easy, it either seems to have to stick with Israel, which it obviously will likely do, but at the same time, it's trying to, have relations or get Israel and America to have relationships with these other countries, which, of course, as this situation gets worse and worse, just becomes more and more untenable, doesn't it?
Well, it does. And, as someone who wants to see us all cooperating, it's a very small planet we live on. We've got to get on together for many, many reasons. The victims are invariably women, children, and innocent. But yes, of course, I want to see everyone have good relations with each other. And the way that the US has gone about that is, well, in any other circumstances, it would be referred to bribery. So they've encouraged the Moroccans to to acknowledge the existence of the State of Israel. There is a spy base being built on the Algerian border, US funded. I have to say, were I a Palestinian, and perhaps I should be grateful I'm not, I would be deeply depressed at my Arab brothers and sisters for the way they've abandoned, and they've done so for the Yankee dollar. They've been bought out quite simply, and there's a lot of phrases that are bandied about that they want us to keep repeating, and so let's give them what they want and talk about the only democracy in the Middle East. Democracy. Israel's a sham. It's a disgrace. It treats half its population as second-class citizens with no rights at all. What we need is huge investment in resolution, and the resolution comes about not by £2,000 bombs, not by selective assassination, because the UK has recently attacked a sovereign nation. They attacked Yemen. That wasn't discussed in the UK Parliament. There's basically
an embassy in Damascus.
Pardon?
And the Iranian embassy in Damascus.
And indeed, and
killing some UK citizens as well.
We have a situation where the world is at a tipping point as regards recognition of rights and roles and responsibilities of, most importantly, international law. And we know that the US and Israel and others aren't necessarily signatories to the International Court of Justice, but it's a commendable thing that the world comes together to see, here's the standards we want to apply to humanity. And I would be naturally suspicious of any nation that would elect to opt out of those. But if the UK, and sadly, I'm a resident of the UK. Meantime, I'm a resident of independent Scotland in due course. But the UK, which is responsible for the foreign affairs of the country that I live in, seems unconcerned at a disregard for the standing of the International Court of Justice. And you can't have a situation where you acknowledge the worth of an institution if you happen to concur with what it says. You either accept that it has value or you don't. And I happen to think that that is perhaps the most worrying aspect, the disregard for international law and the double standards, which are many, as you know.
Well, I mean, it's God, it's like Pandora's box of a conversation, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, one of the things I suppose looking at this is, I mean, if you look, the Americans will call it American exceptionalism. Some people will call them the hegemon, whatever. Things are changing now with BRICS and everything, but they are the major power and have been for America and have been for a very, very long time. But it seems to be, after the Iraq War, pulling out Afghanistan, the list is as long as your arm. And now with this, in the Middle East, it's taken it, like you said, this is the most extreme, and certainly in my lifetime, certainly as I can remember. And it certainly seems that, that American exceptionalism is coming up for some, it's under challenge, it's under threat, and you can say that the American empire has fallen between this, not just only between the BRICS, even domestically, with the way students are going on at the moment, the worldwide uproar about what's going on in Palestine. And so, quite rightly, like you said, I think if you look at, if we can't get the majority, or certainly of the free world, or certainly the progressive world, including Russia, China, and everybody else, to sign up to the ICC and the ICJ, or, even if you make, changes in these institutions that everybody can, mostly agree to. But if we don't have that, we don't have anything at all. And then we have chaos. So that, and once again, sorry, I think what I'm trying to say is American foreign policy and us tagging along with American as we do, and certain other, American vassals, as you would call them, we are heading in a very, very bad direction. And like once you say as well, I mean, if you look at, say, Tony Blair, Bush and stuff, to me, they should have been up in The Hague. And what's going to happen to, to the likes of Biden and the likes of Sunak and others? A few years down the line, if we don't have these international organizations to, even if it takes years to bring around justice, what's the incentive there, or what's the deterrent? Nothing's going to change in the future.
Well, it's incumbent on politicians to conduct themselves with respect with regard to international law, humanitarian norms. And, I think some of these institutions have been discredited. I'm going to sound a bit facetious here, but that's just the way I am, and I'm an old guy now. They seem to be quite efficient at taking the odd black African corporal who was involved in some insurgency in their own country and taking them to justice. But they're not so good at the white elites, perhaps Milosevic being an exception. So it's disappointing. I certainly wouldn't want to portray these world institutions as perfect. They're far from that. The UN is deeply flawed. A significant overplay of the Nuclear Powers Security Council, the veto role. If you see the map of the world and all the countries that recognise Palestine and the countries that don't, of course, it's very telling that in itself. So I get, and it's sometimes important, it's a dangerous place to go maybe, but to try and get into the mind of the Zionists, they have a disregard for these international institutions because they see them as constantly attacking them. But you're going to find yourself under attack, whether the verbal attack and debate attack, if you're on the wrong side of things. And if you're the wrong side of the law, if you're the wrong side of it's a peculiar and an alarming world we're living in at the moment, because you and I standing on a parade in William with a Palestinian flag calling for a ceasefire, to many senior politicians, and not just in the Conservative Party and the Labour Party too, we'd be tagged as extremists. Now, when since did those calling for a cessation of violence become extreme? I think it's those who advocate violence as a solution to everything. And I'm no softie, I'm not a pacifist. And I try and also put myself in the position of being, for instance, a young man in the West Bank. A young man in the West Bank whose grandfather's farm has been raided by settlers, whose olive trees that the family looked after for hundreds of years have been cut down, whose elderly mother has been dragged from her house by someone from Brooklyn who's claiming
Yeah.
some divine
Conceptual
right
land.
to their house. And I would be mighty annoyed. I would be mighty annoyed. And the very least I'd be inclined to do would be throwing stones at people. So I'm not condoning violence from any quarter. But the Palestinians are not unique in this planet in being unable to defend themselves. They're entirely entitled to defend themselves. And it is
even under international law, yeah.
It's the proportionality, that's completely off the scale here. And has long been, but it is about destroying an ethnic group. Quite
well. I'm glad, like you said, John. I mean, I'm glad, like you call it what it is. It's genocide. I mean, so many times I've listened to Ben Gavir and spokesman for him and stuff, and just yesterday I was listening to one of his spokespeople, and he's like saying, "Yes, I'm a settler. These are our old lands, and we're not moving." Do you know what I mean? And that's it. I mean, they're unequivocal. Do you know what I mean? And there's absolutely no way that Israel, or certainly the Israeli government there, they are. I mean, what are they doing to Israel? I mean, is Netanyahu just clinging on to power desperately? I mean, does he not have any idea what's going to happen to Israel? Does he think, for instance, like they're going to literally go into Rafah, kill tens more thousands of people, literally, as you say, ethnic cleanse the Palestinians out of their lands, and then expect things to die down in a year or two, and everyone's going to get back to normal? I mean, like you said, I think you mentioned it earlier, they have no plan. They're just going gung-ho. They're killing thousands and thousands of children. They're starving that 1.5 million people, which I think I was listening to a doctor yesterday, Mos Nadir, I think his name was. He's one of the American doctors there, and he's been over there for several weeks now, just describing the position of, like, he says he's never seen anything in his life. I mean, if you think about what is being done to 1.5 million people, 700,000 children being starved, it's absolutely mind-blowingly it's not acceptable under any circumstances at all. And like I said, if you look at the American, you say, just as an example, if you look at the American students on campus, I'm just using that as one example, then, the policy that the Americans are trying to project, Biden's trying to project of being a peace man and all this malarkey, people are seeing right through it. And that's not just on a domestic scale. I think that's on a bigger scale, on a more global scale. America's sort of veneer is rubbing off, and I think that's having tumultuous effect across the globe.
Do you know, Ed, you'll be familiar with the fact that I was in Gaza after one of the periods of conflict, as they would like to call them, in 2012. It was part of a European parliamentary delegation, and I met some very interesting folk out there, and I've instantly forgotten the woman's name. You would know her the minute you saw her. She's a very brave woman. It's part of an organisation called Code Pink, who are Jewish women, largely Jewish women in America, who challenge politicians. And I say that because, to me, this is nothing. This is not about religion. This is not about religion. This is about colonial settlers, and you've seen some of the parallels with the Native Americans and how they were treated. But one of the complications is the religious aspect, because I know a number of people who would say that they're Christians. I'm a man of no faith, I think, as I was once described. But I absolutely respect people's entitlement to hold views, I think that many people of religion are promote the values that of compassion, understanding, and humanity that I would support. But it's become complicated because part of the pressure that was put on Biden with this billion-pound arms thing came not just from the pro-Israeli lobby, which of course is everywhere there, but also from fundamental Christians. And this is this nonsense about the chosen people and the chosen land, the promised land. Well, I'm going to dangerous territory here, but if there was a God, I don't think my God would choose people that would want to cut off water cut off food to children, that would want their
Exactly.
adherents to defecate into their water systems, to blow up their wells, to make... So I think we have to be very conscious of the fact that throughout the world, protests are being led by Jewish people who are absolutely horror the notion that their faith has been attached to this sort of conduct. They're very brave people. And of course, this sends a lie to the nonsense about London isn't a safe place for Jewish people to go about at the weekend, when there are, of course, hundreds of thousands indeed involved in some of these marches. So what we're seeing with the students there is a real challenge to the land of the free, isn't it? Peaceful demonstrations being brutally broken up. And we've seen that mirrored. I have to say, a special word of condemnation to Germany, whose conduct is absolutely reprehensible, who have way gone beyond strong-arm breaking up of demonstrations, the breaking up of meetings, seizing of sound equipment so that people can't hold legitimate meetings. You know, they need to get over. Need to get over their bad behaviour, their horrendous behaviour of the Nazi era, and move on. You know, people like me who have had a relative killed, they have moved on with no animosity. You know, you must move on with things. And there are people who they're just trying too hard. They're very pro-Israel. They want to kill it. Again, it just fundamentally undermines other values. You can't pick and choose the baddies you want to be inside with and say, oh, well, there's a good reason for that. You either adhere to principles of humanity, principles of international law, or you don't. And sadly, Germany, like Canada, like France, like the UK, like the US, isn't. If you think of the correct outrage there was when Russia invaded the Ukraine, and outrage there was attacks in civilian areas. Well, it's like, now, where are you hearing that from?
No. I totally agree. And as far as I understand it, the Russians are fighting really kind of a toe-to-toe sort of soldier-to-soldier battle, really, compared. I mean, you know, I don't know what the percentages are for the civilian losses in Gaza, but it will be several times of magnitude above what's happening in Ukraine and Russia.
But I think there's an element of outrage that Israel wants to cause. They relocated some people a couple of days ago. Relocated, they ethnically cleansed or frog marched them with no alternative. But I don't know if you saw a shell being discharged at the tents they relocated them to, a tank shell. And you know, it's just way beyond anything. They disguising themselves, Israeli commanders disguising themselves as medical staff to raid these hospitals. The nonsense of the stories. And there's some very eloquent people, far more eloquent than me, and talented people at drawing, and there's cartoons, there's electronic representations of the hypocrisy of all this, you know, how willingly people believed beheaded babies but don't give a damn about thousands of babies being killed, that sort of, you know. And we know that sows a seed. You know, that's what a horrible concept. Sows a seed and it's there. And they don't need to. It's a bit like the UNRWA, which of course doesn't simply work in the occupied countries. It works in some of the surrounding countries too, to support Palestinian refugees. And Israel's never come forward with any evidence of their allegations of wrongdoing there. I have to say, with a 30,000 some staff out, I don't suppose that's 30,000 angels, but you know, it's the reality of the situation is that people in the UK withholding aid from, it's disgusting. I'm depressed with the world, to be quite frank, and that's not.
I know what you mean, and you're probably like myself. You go through periods, and you know you can't get too involved in it all the time. I always say that you don't want to get one extreme where you just worry about the outside world and not worry about the inside world, because you can't neglect either. No. You have to try to sort of get that balance, as you know. But the situation, like I said, if you can tell me, what do you think about? I mean, I do get an. It's probably not hit Lochaber yet so much, but you know, like I said, I'm trying to sort of zone in on this. I mean, you could probably I don't know, as an example, go back to Vietnam, with all the demonstrations, and I mean, it took years, but what happened there, I mean, and if you look at that as a sort of a, the canary in the tunnel, this is the same thing happening over there in America now, and it's catching on elsewhere too. And it is this real disconnect, what you're talking about here, where Israel's doing what it likes to do. There's nobody in there actually taking account of things. And if they do, the Israelis will shoot them up, doctors, reporters, or whatever. So, they talk about democracy. Well, if it's a democracy, you should be acting under international law. You should be allowing people in to see that you're, allies, that you're conducting the war, as you should under international law. There's none of that. And anybody who's paying attention, including ourselves, John, can see this. And this, of course, this is why it's having a really bad effect on us, like you're talking, what you're basically talking about, free speech, the right to demonstration and stuff. We now have a state that is acting, is actually using force and violence, against us, like you say, the people who are against what's happening. So we have a really situation which I think is not even broke yet. It could very well get a whole lot worse very, very quickly.
Well, you only know what you're told, and what you're told is very limited. I've taken to a long-time critic of the BBC, which of course viewed very, very factually as actually the UK state broadcaster. But I listened to the half-hour bulletin. I was going somewhere in the van the other day, and I think there was 9 or 10 items on the 3:30 news. None of them mentioned Gaza. None of them. Now, they were all very important stories, and there were stories that uncovered elsewhere about Myanmar and about Sudan, and huge, huge problems across the world. And it's fair to say that there was a more in-depth thing later on in the programme. But a news bulletin with almost a double-figure number of items and no mention of Gaza, I thought was very telling. You have a situation where the language is very important, and we know that language is very important. So Hamas take hostages, but Israel takes prisoners. Now,
that's right. Yeah.
I listen very, very intently to the words that are used, and I remember one of the most fascinating news clips I heard was someone explaining there were the BBC representative in Jerusalem. And no matter what the incident was, the minute an incident had taken place, they were bombarded with faxes, with emails. I'm showing my age here, faxes, and with sides giving their version of what had happened. So it's very challenging. Things are a matter of opinion. Jeremy Bowen, who was long reported in the Middle East, and I think is a very balanced reporter. In fact, he was involved in this, and where his cameraman was shot the Lebanese border a number of years ago. But I listened to him a few months back, and he was saying they were invited into, this is fairly early on, into the north of Gaza, and they were shown how meticulously and how well ordered the troops were and how they conducted themselves, and that was them back out. He said, we can only imagine we were allowed in because they wanted us to see what was going on.
Yeah.
We're now not allowed in because they don't want us to see what's going on. And as you know, the press were targeted. The press there were targeted. Some very courageous people, Al Jazeera, people from all over. And they particularly targeted the journalists who had mastered drone technology to provide pictures. They had snipers that were killing them. There's been selective assassination throughout. And there's been plenty of random killing, but very much targeted killing.
And the IDF just get away with it year after year, decade after decade. I mean, there's never even an investigation, as far as I understand. Well, I mean, I'm not aware of it. It's just
some things are beyond the organ theft. I would not be aware of that. They have been stealing organs. They've been stealing organs from Palestinians. Now that happened.
That sounds like something of them.
Yeah, and it's perfectly true. And don't take my word for it, because the Israeli government said a number of years ago, Yeah, no, it's unacceptable. We used to do that. We don't do that anymore. Well, guess what? They're doing it again. They're doing it again. They've just been disfiguring corpses. Now, these are factual things that are, I'm not trying to, these are disgusting things.
No, I understand.
And it's for that reason that you need a press. You need a press.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you've seen the statistics, and forgive me, I'm not one for numbers, but the statistics of the number of journalists killed in the Second World War across the world, I'll say it was 180. There's been hundreds of journalists killed in.
Yeah. They've been targeted. There's no way to them figures that they say they're not being targeted, or you can at the bare minimum, you know, their assassinations have been indiscriminate. Totally.
Yeah.
You know, that's the least that you could say. I mean, once again, this is the thing. You know, no reporters. You know, no one's in there getting the situation. You're only getting, you know, by certain biases. They've even got rid of Al Jazeera now. But like, and you know, if we don't have it, if there's no objective, you know, analysis after the fact, and if people go in and get out some details, like all these hundreds of people they found, you know, just executed with their hands tied behind their backs. You know, I can't even remember what this awful excuses were that about. I mean, I'm not even interested. It's so shocking. People have got to be held accountable for that. I mean, they have, because otherwise, what is the point? You know,
to people of my generation, the pictures that we've seen of these and people being stripped to their waist and put in the back of trucks and taken away, and of course, you know that a number have been taken to a camp in the Israeli desert and tortured and returned. But they're entirely reminiscent of the Nazi era. And, you know, so if you don't want to be called Nazis, I've said this, don't behave like Nazis. But throughout history, there have been people not just the Nazis that behave like that. You know, Stalin behaved like that, the Pol Pot regime. It's shocking. It's absolutely shocking. And where you would look in a supposed progressive liberal democracy like the UK, you would expect some sort of challenge to the government position. That's the role of opposition. It is to scrutinise the role of government. The leader of the opposition in the UK Parliament couldn't be more compliant. Whatever the Conservatives are going to say, Labour are going to agree with it and do a bit more.
Well, of course.
And you know, we maybe now see, and I'm no fan of the Labour Party, they're big enough and ugly enough to look after themselves, but what I would say is that never for 1 second did I believe Jeremy Corbyn was anti-Semitic.
I couldn't agree with you there more, John. There's a whole new precedent, you know.
And what we've seen since, I'm sure, and this is not being maybe a bit out of order, but I'm sure Keir Starmer's in-laws in Tel Aviv will enjoy how he's been conducting himself. I think that we need scrutiny. We need scrutiny of individual governments. We need scrutiny of the role of international organisations as well. Nothing's perfect.
I mean, this is the problem, you know, and probably Jeremy Corbyn will describe it pretty well. But you know, you have the Tories in power, you have the Labour as the opposite, and there's nothing between them anymore. I mean, there was always a bit of a joke, you know, but now it's so obvious. But they still sell themselves, and the BBC frame it as, you know, oh, will you go for Labour because they'll do this and they'll challenge that, and Keir Starmer will give you a big smile and tell you one thing one day and then exactly the opposite the next day, and then just carry on like nothing's happened, and BBC or whatever don't hold them to account. So, you know, we're just in this situation where people, you know, most people, like even myself to some degree, you know, you might vote for a party you think has liberal values or something, whatever your bag is. You know, they're going to represent you, and not only do they not represent you, they're the biggest hypocrites in the world. So how's anything ever going to get done?
Well, there are a number of complications, and I'll not go into the machinations of NATO, which was an important cause for me a number of years ago, but people have become emboldened by how the reaction to how Israel have got on. You know, you had Trump saying that he was going to pull out of NATO if the countries didn't
pay more money to
it. There's a move with that. NATO wanted to open, what was it they wanted to call it, a diplomatic office in Japan, because as your geography will tell you, the North Atlantic, of course, is just right beside Japan, isn't it? You know, I'm being sarcastic here. So war's good for business, and it doesn't really matter whether you kill women or kids, whether you blow up. And there was a very good reason that we're using these high-powered explosives many, many, many more times than Nagasaki and Hiroshima. And they're destroying the aquifer, the water supply there in the course of doing this. So it's great. The military-industrial complex are absolutely delighted with the way things are going. I understand that as part of a tax dodge in the US, they're heavily involved with their investments in these major league universities, which might be another reason why we're having such violent suppression of the courageous student process. And imagine having to say courageous. It should be courageous to say, I don't think that's right. We can all have different opinions.
Yeah.
Courageous used to be something you would say about someone protesting in the Soviet Union or Albania or China, but not in the land of the free, surely to goodness.
Well, yeah. Well, I think once again, like you said, I think once again you've opened up another can of worms here, John. I mean, I remember back in the day, having to do an essay, and it was the state/civil society, And I remember thinking, don't you mean even back then state, corporate/civil society, And of course, like now we're getting to that point, where it's quite obvious, that it is the state/corporate side of things versus civil society. And like I keep referring to, nothing. The example of what's happening on campuses in America is giving the temperature there, and I can't see anything changing in the American foreign policy at the moment. You can hear a load of rhetoric. They'll always try to say what people want as best as they can, but we know that they're going to ultimately support Israel when it comes down to it. And going into Rafah and this carrying on. I mean, how do we us in the West get on with this from a moral point of view, John? Like you, I'm a man of faith, but I have great respect of people. If religion gives people solace and stuff, of course you've got to respect that, shared values and stuff like this. But honestly, John, I'll be honest with you as well. I see the West, and particularly in this example, as totally immoral. I mean, we're the bad guys here, and that doesn't sit with me and you, and it doesn't sit with a lot of people. And once again, I think it's an unsustainable position. So we've either got to have some give back from that state corporate, part of the equation, or what I suspect is now they'll just double down as they do through the media and violence and everything else. And like I said, I think we're going to find ourselves in a very, very difficult position over the next few years. I think this situation we're in Gaza and even Ukraine, potentially others and stuff, but it's almost like a big, like you say, melting pot, and things seem to be really, really shaken up.
Well, if you were to have turned the clock back, not that long ago, and the suggestion that there was lots and lots of aid and it was going to go to one country, would it go to Israel or would it go to a country that's under attack from what's seen as the former Soviet Union? Well, unquestionably, the US would have put money there. Now, Ukraine's a very complicated situation too. That's not a good reason a bad reason. I respect international law that people shouldn't breach that. But of course, they already had breached that in relation to Crimea and the annexed bits of Georgia as well. But that's about testing. So Russia tested the West resolve there. Israel tested what the West would put up with long since. And they know the West's not going to say anything because we're going to be anti-Semitic. Well, quite frankly, I'm not bothered what religion anyone is. Any religion, no religion. It's how they conduct themselves that's important. And it is worrying. And if you go back to and how wrong he was, you'll remember George Bush on the deck of a aircraft carrier in San Francisco Bay in his daft outfit saying, you might are with us or you're with the terrorists. And I immediately went, oh, neither of you. You know, it isn't that
He
choice.
said that to his domestic, and he said that to the world.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So you also mentioned, of course, we had our own George Bush, and that was the war criminal that is Tony Blair, and that goes that still is an unresolved issue. Barefaced lies,
Yeah.
mimicked in the film, in the loop, and just beyond,
Which amounted in 1 million Iraqi deaths. I mean, was it 600,000 children? Like I always say, what was it, Madeleine Albright? I'll always remember the day I was watching it when she turned around and was asked, was 600,000 dead Iraqi children worth the price of freedom? And she said, yes. It's just...
Well, from a woman who's actually was Czechoslovakian, who you would imagine would have appreciated the concept of freedom having been unlocked from the Soviet Union. But there's a moral bankruptcy, and it's normally the socially conservative that are using language like that. But I far from being socially conservative, feel that's what's missing. It's absolutely missing. I can't believe, and I'm assured by my wife, who knows more about algorithms than me, that it's nothing to do with individuals. But I can put a picture of my wee doggy on Facebook and get lots and lots of likes. I can put up a picture of the latest atrocity and get a handful. Now, a lot of Christian folk are using their words from their book, walking by on the other side. And I think in part it is because of this confusion, the promised land, the holy lands, whatever. I think every land's holy land. I think everyone is holy. I think everyone has the right to the same level of expectations about what the future holds for them. And it's I just the other day saw it's Emily Thornberry, the Labour Party woman, saying, "Oh no, it's still right. No, it's still right. No, you misunderstand when he said cut off water. No one misunderstands what he said when he cut off water and electricity." And it's so where you have the people you would expect to be the challenge to any government supporting that position, when they share that position, and of course,
And this is where mainstream politics is really kind of failing, isn't it? Would you say?
I would say it is. I would say that I think there's an argument to be made that there's less government power now. You know the situation that many corporations have more wealth than sovereign nations.
Oh, absolutely.
You know that. And on one level, I try and strip it right down to how I would have conducted. I remember trying to ensure that there was no money from Highlands and Islands Enterprise went to defence companies.
Oh, yeah.
Trying to now, honest to goodness, you would have thought I was suggesting a manned probe to Mars or something. It was pretty straightforward, but something to give that balance. Something I did learn is, for instance, if you made batteries, a battery could go in a car and it could go in a tank. I accept that. And if you make lasers, a laser can have a medical use as well as to use. But it's the reach of these companies, BAE, Lockheed Martin, is quite incredible. They are in almost every constituency of our representation. And well-meaning politicians are unlikely to challenge something that gives gainful employment to 300 or 400 of their constituents. It's very difficult. It's deeply entrenched. We need a change of approach. I hear David Cameron, who's our unelected Foreign Secretary, indeed rejected in some respects, talking about the export license system for UK arms and how that's different from America, and it's on a smaller scale. No, it's good for business. It's really, really good for business. And the UK is a major arms exporter. And if a fraction of the energy was put into exporting diplomats or people to engage and talk, because there were a lot of hope invested in the talks, Hamas came to a point, and I don't know the fine detail of the law, it will always be up for debate, but that just happened to coincide with Israel saying, no, that's not enough. what apparently up to that point had been enough wasn't enough, and they were into Rafah. And so with many challenges, Ed, and they don't just relate to the conflict or the ongoing genocide. The conflict is about morality. The conflict is about interpretations of international law and what the consequences of not following accepted practice are. Because heaven forbid that there was an atrocity visited on the country that Rusi Shinnick's responsible for, but he would be talking war crimes. He wouldn't be, if we know that conflict, some conflict has been halted. If you take, for instance, the situation within the United Kingdom in the north of Ireland there, people were killed for many years. It was only when the financial sector in the City of London was attacked, and I'm not condoning that attack, and the big business said to Tony Blair, "You sort this out, or we're off to Dusseldorf."
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So, to that extent, the corporate interests are trumping so many things, and
they are, John. And I mean, I think I mentioned it the meeting we had just the other week about talking about BDS and stuff. I mean, because we got a freedom of information request many years ago, me and some others, just to look at because we wanted to find about investments in pensions, Highland Council. And of course, a lot of money goes into these defence, companies. Not quite as much as tobacco, I made the joke, but quite a lot. Now, of course, this gets to the real heart of it. What I'm thinking is because, the politicians can do the rhetoric and stuff, and we're trying to think what we could do. Some people go and demonstrate this, that, and the other. But maybe, like some people have successfully managed to do, with the boycott and divest and stuff. I mean, for instance, because like you said, it's with a corporate thing, right? Why do they have so much power? They have so much power mostly because nobody even talks about it. I mean, it's like you talk about, say, the UK doesn't export as much as like America or whatever. Okay, that's fine. But every single council in Scotland I know has has investments in what I call arms companies. So, we're propping it all up, and most people don't even know about it. But of course, when you look at these companies, and if you look at Highland Council, for instance, when they get like a private company to make investments for them, and they have their fiduciary responsibility, to make profits, as it were. So they're investing in these arms companies, which make good return on their money, and nobody takes in ironically, the collateral damage of those investments, do they? That's not talked about.
You said the key phrase. It is fiduciary duty is the phrase that officials immediately bandy towards. And for folk who are not up with that term, that is the obligation on the pension fund, those responsible for the pension fund, who are in fact the councillors, to maximise profit. Well, that's challengeable. And it's challengeable for a number of reasons. You mentioned tobacco, for us. We'll move away from arms to tobacco. How ironic that a council that's promoting healthy living, working in combination through health and social care partnerships with the should be giving money to these corporations. So it can be done, and it can be moved away. What it requires is vigilance to stay on top of it, because I can't remember who does the Highland Council one, but I think Scottish Parliamentary one was Bailey Gifford. Or this is big business for folk. This is big business for folk, and these are significant sums of public money and I mean, it's public employees' money. And but that's the phrase, your fiduciary duty to maximise profit. Well, it can be circumvented and should be circumvented. But of course, there's great pressure to maintain these sums of money investing in the armaments and tobacco, and indeed the fossil fuel industry. Well,
that's what I mean. I think it might be just at the tip of the iceberg with all the demonstrations that's going on, because as we just said, when you just dig a little bit deeper and stuff, because you might be able to put plaster on the Vietnam War or the Gaza situation or the Ukraine war situation, but until everybody stops, or our councils on, with their fiduciary responsibility, investing in like you said, the military industry income, the military industry industrial complex.
Yeah. Well, yes, but again, it's back to it's seen as the extreme to put money into positive things rather than
Yes.
as I would view armaments negative things, and that is about excuse me, that is about the perceptions that portrayed. And when I say about vigilance, when I was in the Scottish Parliament in the first term, when I was an independent and part of the Independent Green Group, we became aware that the Parliament was hosting business awards, and that one of the business awards was being presented by Lockheed Martin. Now, Lockheed Martin are the biggest arms country in the world. And on behalf of the five of us who objected to the presiding officer that this should be the case, and I jest you not, I got a letter back from the presiding officer of the Scottish Parliament telling me that Lockheed Martin was an IT company based in Aberdeen. Now, there's no doubt that these companies reach as far, and I don't doubt they'll have an IT wing around it, but it's very, very difficult to challenge. There's accepted practice, and accepted practices that companies are good. So whether it's your Coca-Colas, your Levi's, you know the list, the McDonald's, and it's often complicated by some of these. And when I was reading the other day about the commendable efforts of, was it Ben and Jerry's, or what were the ice cream companies at Benny and Jerry's or whatever, and how they had stopped investing, but they just altered the license, and it can still continue as a franchisee or something. That's not a criticism of Ben and Jerry's or whatever they're called. So you have to try and be one step ahead of them, but you shouldn't have to be one step ahead of folk. Going back to our original subject on matters of states are allowed to use violence. The states are allowed to use violence in some instances through the police to protect the public and the community, and through the armed forces to likewise do that. But there's always been rules of engagement. That book's out the window. That doesn't exist. You can do what you want. I'm not hearing much talk about, isn't it terrible the Russians have been shelling near Kharkiv, there's a residential area there. Well, even they've worked out that would be a bit hypocritical given what we've seen and witnessed in the occupied territories, you know. Oh, you've gone quiet in my head there. You've muted yourself. There you go.
Too long, John. You probably wanted to get some lunch in. I'd love to be able to catch up with you again some other time to get a conversation.
No problem. You've muted yourself again, Ed. You've muted yourself again. Look, there you go. That's you. Are you there?
Am I still there? Do you see me?
You're there. Yes, I'm hearing you. Yeah. You obviously hit some button and you were muting yourself. Yeah.
Oh, right. Okay. Yes. It was just someone was calling me. I'm on Nan's phone, as you can tell, and I'm not on my phone. I can put on my do not disturb, but I haven't done it on this.
Right.
I don't know how to do it. John, listen, thank you so much for the discussion, and I'm so glad that I managed to get to speak to you. But wanting to do it for ages. When I see Caroline and stuff, I say, "Oh, God, I need to get in contact with John," and she says, "I can just catch him on Facebook." I just glad of that. There's so many jobs.
No, catch up another time.
That would be great, John. Catch up another time, because I mean, once again, I suppose in a certain way, it's a little bit just for me as well, just to be able to get the chance to speak to somebody about these, because I don't often get that much of a chance. So I'm hoping that some of the listeners will at least enjoy our conversation and understand it's just an informal chat, and hopefully get involved themselves.
Well, the one thing I would just say before I go, it's very easy, and I found myself getting totally engrossed in this. It's a horrendous situation.
Yeah.
Someone said to me, "Please, no more dead babies." I'm posting on Facebook. Well, it's important that you put your pictures of your wee dog as well as the pictures of the wee baby, the dead babies. But we sadly don't have a press that's telling you all that's going on, and there's many courageous folk there with simply a mobile phone that are sharing the atrocities that are taking place. And yes, everything needs to be fact checked, and I think there's no doubt where it fact checked would understand that the world would understand that this is a genocide. It's a genocide that's been done with the compliance of the so-called civilized West, and it has to end. There needs to be a ceasefire.
It does. It absolutely has to end, John. But I think we'll end there. It absolutely has to end. And I look forward to talking to you again, John. Thanks again for your time. It's been really lovely talking to you.
Look at yourself.
Cheers. Bye
Bye bye.
bye. Bye bye.